Join us at this year's Expat Money Summit. This is our annual online event, and this year promises to be bigger and better than ever before. Previous year's guests include Congressman Dr. Ron Paul, Doug Casey, Mark Faber, Tom Woods, Peter Schiff, Scott Horton, Alex Craner, Tom Luongo, Jim Rogers, and John Perkins, as well as many of the best lawyers, accountants, bankers, hedge fund managers, and property developers from my trusted Rolodex of contacts. Grab your complimentary ticket at expatmoneysummit.com. That's expatmoneysummit.com. expatmoneysummit.com. This year, I'm taking a private group into the Amazon rainforest. Then we head to Fortaleza and explore Brazil's booming northeast coast. Think Amazon River cruises, beachfront developments, and wide-open opportunities. From the heart of the rainforest to pristine beaches most people only dream about. This is a bucket list meets Plan B strategy. If you've ever wanted to see the real Brazil and scout investments along the way, this is it. For more information, go to expatmoney.com/Brazil. That's expatmoney.com/Brazil. One more time, expatmoney.com/Brazil.
We all dream of seeing the world, but the realities of living somewhere outside your place of birth can be daunting to say the least. Welcome to the Expat Money Show, helping you make the most out of your overseas career through conversations with successful expats on investing, entrepreneurship, self-improvement, and continual education, all while sharpening your financial acumen. Now please welcome your host with over 20 years of overseas experience, Mikkel Thorup.
Welcome. My name is Mikkel Thorup, and this is the Expat Money Show. Today, we're going to be doing part 3 of my conversation with Joshua Sheets. This is such a phenomenal conversation. We're really digging into the meat in this last part. Now, if you guys have been following along in part 1, part 2, then you guys will know what's going on. If you've missed those episodes, then please go back and listen to them because there's so many amazing things to learn. Now, even if you don't have children or you even don't have children who are this age, this series of episode is on more than just kids. It's really on learning. And I think it is such an important piece of your expat journey, being open to a lot of these ideas, how you guys are going to acquire knowledge and information, and really opening up a whole bunch of new pathways for you and your family. So make sure you go back and listen to part 1 and part 2, and we're going to dig into part 3 in just a second. I want you guys to go to expatmoney.com and sign up for our webinars. We have new webinars coming out every single month. Go to expatmoney.com/webinars to get on the mailing list, to register for the ones that are applicable to you. Tons of amazing things happening at expatmoney.com this year, and I want to make sure you guys are involved. There we go. Let's jump into part 3. Now, the book that you mentioned before Peak, I actually went out there and bought that. And I'm super excited to read it because you mentioned it to me very recently. Now, when you and I were sitting at the beach, I don't know if you're going to remember the conversation, but we were sitting there and we were having a beer on the beach. And you were telling me a story about chess, about a chess prodigy. I found that story super illustrative of what we're talking about today. And if you do remember the conversation, perhaps you can recall it for everybody today.
Yeah, I do. And this story is, to me, the thing that is one of the best arguments to say that almost anybody can be what we would call a prodigy at almost anything that you want to be in the fullness of time. So the story is that of a Hungarian psychologist and researcher. I believe his name was Laszlo. And he was very interested in learning techniques and teaching, and he believed that he could create genius. So before he was ever married, before he had children, he wanted to test his theories and see if he could raise genius children. So when he went looking for a wife, he had these very unusual requirements. And he said, potential wife, we're going to raise children and we're going to help them to be geniuses. He found a lady who was a former school teacher who was willing to marry him and engage on this experiment. So they talked and thought about what discipline, what field they should use. They talked, for example, about mathematics, because in the culture of the Soviet Union at the time, mathematics were very influential, and other ideas. They thought about languages. How many languages could a child ultimately learn? But he ultimately decided on chess. And the reasons for that is chess and chess skill and ability is one of the most objectively measured disciplines out there. You know, if you are a chess grandmaster, you know how good you are. There's a very comprehensive and effective rating system. It's not subjective in any way. So he and his wife had children. They wound up ultimately having 3 daughters, and they homeschooled their children. And over time, they started to introduce chess. And they introduced it in a soft way, but they were determined that their daughters would develop interest in chess. The end of the story is fascinating because all 3 of his daughters achieved world-class expert status in chess to varying degrees. Chess, they were all pioneers as female chess players in a heavily male-dominated sport. They all achieved recognized world-class status. There was a different level of achievement among all 3 of them, but they all achieved this. And it's a remarkable story that proves that at least in the field of chess, and possibly in other subjects, performing as a genius chess performer is entirely predictable. Because how else does someone do what he did? Now, for the rebuttal to that, I've recently finished another book called Range. The rebuttal to that is that not all learning environments and not all skills are that. So in Range, some of the learning, David Epstein, the author, he talks about that and describes that in what he calls a kind learning environment, something like chess, that level of genius performance is always achievable under those scenarios. But then there are other learning environments for other disciplines. He calls them wicked learning environments, where it's not so applicable. So we don't want to just go all in on hyper specialization. We want to maintain this general base of experience and general base of knowledge. But genius is largely, if not entirely, predictable. And that anecdote demonstrates it very powerfully.
Well, it goes back to at least what I was told when I was a child. And it was, Mikhail, you can do anything you want in this world. You can be whoever you want. You can do whatever you want. And you know what? I absolutely believed my mother. And what have I done? I've gone out there and created my life. And I also describe myself as an autodidact polymath and have for many years, that I can have intelligent conversations with people from all over the world about multiple different things from a self-taught and aspect. And that's what I wanted to do. And I've done multiple things at extremely high levels. I mean, take martial arts. I mentioned before that my children are learning martial arts. Well, I was also on Team Canada for martial arts. I competed internationally at 17 years old and went to the Worlds and medaled in martial arts as a child because I loved it and it was what I wanted to do. And that was an interest-based learning for me. And I consumed it all day long and pushed myself and I enjoyed it so much. I do my work right now as top of my field. There's very few human beings who can do what I can do in this type of space. Then, or a lot of people might know from previous episodes that I'm absolutely so passionate on the field of longevity and biohacking. And I can have very in-depth scientific conversations with people on what works, what doesn't work, why, where it came from, everything like that. Completely different things. And I could probably name a dozen other things that I do at an extremely high level that I do because of the foundational work, which we have definitely dug into in today's conversation. But I think we could probably go even further in depth, but we'll save everybody from that. But I have proven to myself that I can do anything that I want to do as long as I put the time, energy, and effort into it. And it's so cool, a story like your chess. I think that's why it really like resonated with me so well, is because it's like, it's not just one of the children. It's not two of the children. It's 3 of the children. And you correct me if I'm wrong, but he himself, before he started this process, he wasn't a grandmaster in chess, right? Like it wasn't something
No.
like he had this massive background. So therefore, maybe it was genetics that was magically chess genetics that was passed on to the kids. It was something that he randomly chose because he thought it was a good example of to be able to prove his hypothesis. And he did.
Right.
And it's like, for me, that's super inspiring.
It is. And you're absolutely right. He had no special training in chess. He had no, unique ability in that area at all. And I think it's important that we emphasize that these things are learned. Keep mentioning languages, probably the most spectacularly unusual results that I've achieved so far in my homeschool with my children has been in the areas of languages. And I still try to not talk too much about it because they're all different levels, different ages coming up. But as you studied languages as well, I studied it, and I came to believe, people talk about, well, I'm not good at languages. There's no such thing as not being good at languages, unless quite literally you can't hear or you can't speak or you can't see. We all speak languages. And I've studied some of the world's greatest polyglots, and they don't seem to have.
I've had a lot of them on my podcast.
Yeah.
Like a lot of them on my podcast over the years.
It's just a matter of interest and desire that keeps you doing the work and studying it. And you can have more efficient techniques and less efficient techniques. But on the whole, if you're exposed to comprehensible input, you will learn a language in the fullness of time. And the only limit on the number of languages that a human being is capable of speaking is a time limit on how long it takes you to learn the languages, and then how much time you can invest into maintaining those languages over time. So there is a limit, but it's not a limit of intelligence or ability. It's a limit simply of the amount of time to acquire the languages and then to maintain them over time. We're all potential geniuses if we apply that skill set.
Well, I've got a couple of thoughts on languages, and I'm glad that you brought it back up because it is actually one of my favorite subjects and one that I'm so grateful to have this podcast to discuss because I just think it's so absolutely fascinating. Now, while I'm telling a quick story or a quick idea about this, you promised us you would pull out the calculator before to figure out how many languages someone should be able to learn based on the numbers that we gave earlier of, I think it was 18,000 hours of study for schooling for a traditional education, or a certain amount of hours that you have in adolescence. Now, my point is that you mentioned comprehensible input, and that is absolutely the phrase. And actually, earlier in our conversation, where you were talking about, going right up to the level of learning, I think we described it in a 20-minute conversation, but we can describe it in 2 words, and that is comprehensible input. It is going right up to the level of what you're able to do, and then just a tiny bit beyond it. It is not 5-year-olds reading university textbooks. That's not going to be comprehensible. Yes, it's input, but they're not going to understand it, right? It's just going at their level and just a tiny bit beyond. And it is something that I'm putting into place with my daughter's education in everything. Everything. We're just trying to push. We're trying to figure out what she knows and understands and then push it just a little bit. And then the next day, a little bit more. And then the next week or the next month, a little bit more, over and over and over again. Now, as for language learning, my daughter speaks native level English, native level Spanish, and native level Mandarin Chinese. I don't just mean she's fluent. I mean she is native. She converses in 3 languages, switching between languages at all times. Our house is always in 3 languages, so a third, nonstop. Our dinner table, our breakfast table, always in 3 languages. She will turn to the nannies and speak in Spanish. She'll turn to me and my mother and speak in English, and she will turn to my wife and speak in Mandarin Chinese. She never speaks to my wife in English. She never speaks to me in Spanish. She never speaks to the nanny in English. It is always bang on. And it was very interesting. Leading up to Christmas, we had a Christmas party at my house with about somewhere around 15 or 20 of my clients came over. And my daughter thought it would be really fun, or her art teacher thought it would be really fun to exhibit the art that she's been doing over the year. So what they did was they taped all of her art projects around our living room. And we had about, as I said, about 20 of my clients. These are adults and well-to-do, multi-millionaire families, very affluent and well-educated and well-traveled, excellent human beings. And so she had to explain and describe each one of the paintings or pictures or drawings or sculptures or whatever the medium that she was doing in her private art lessons to each one of the people, to the group. So she's there explaining at 7 years old to 20 adults, but she's not doing it in English. She's doing it in English and then Spanish and then in Chinese, because we had Panamanians, we had other Chinese people there, and other Canadians and Americans there. And she was able to bang, 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 swap between languages and explain in a deep manner of what she was thinking slash feeling slash what she was trying to convey in this piece of art in multiple languages in real time. And I just was like, she's my hero. I'm just like, this is so cool. This is so amazing. I absolutely, obviously love her, but I'm also just so massively impressed with her. Now, she's also studied Russian for 2 years. She decided on her own she didn't like Russian, but she asked me a couple of months ago, where was I born? All right, I explained to her she was born in Abu Dhabi. It's a GCC. It's a Middle Eastern country. She goes, well, what language do they speak there? And I said, well, they speak Arabic. She says, I want to learn Arabic. I said, great. How do you think you should learn Arabic? She goes, let me think about it. Maybe I could watch my tablet in Arabic. Perfect. So we swapped her tablet into Arabic, and now she watches cartoons in Arabic. She says, maybe I could get someone to practice with. So we went on italki, and we found tutors for her in Arabic. And now every day, 5 days a week, she gets Arabic lessons. Now we got Arabic flashcards, the spaced repetition. We got Arabic storybooks. We get all of these types of mediums that she's learning in Arabic. And it was kind of funny because I actually brought her out of the Middle East because I thought she would do a lot better in her life if she learned Spanish. And now she's surprised me by going back and showing an interest in learning Arabic. And it's just funny how things work out. And so she's now learning Arabic. But languages are so important. And I really don't believe it doesn't matter how important or advanced artificial intelligence or blockchain or robotics or any of these types of things get. I still think that conversing with somebody else in their native tongue at a high level is going to be such a massively rewarding experience that I just think it'll always be valuable. I really do.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly concur. And even if technologically we fix the technological curve fundamentally, somebody who is monolingual is distinctly disadvantaged in life because he has never learned how to see the world through a different lens. By learning just one other second language, you understand that your thinking abilities are shaped by your language, and you become conscious of how you think differently. Not only do you express yourself differently, but you think differently in languages, and you become more aware of your own thinking. So I'll tell you the chart that I did. And to be clear, I don't believe there's a limit on the number of languages that a child can learn. I think that it's a matter of time. The way that you are teaching your children languages is the best way because it's all through normal interaction. The comprehensible input is all delivered in the context of relationship. For anybody who's interested, the most inspiring video that I found on that, there's a little girl named Bella who was on a Russian game show on YouTube. And you can find it on YouTube. Just search Bella languages and you'll find it, I'm sure. Beautiful little girl, probably 6 years old. And she was fluent in 7 languages, reading and speaking on this game show, proven by interacting with native speakers. And I researched the story because I wanted to see, and her mom had done it all using the techniques that you're employing of individuals who are in her life. She brought in this person, that person, and the other person. And so I think that's the best way. And I've seen some very inspiring stories. I'm just jealous I didn't marry a Chinese-speaking wife. I married an English-speaking wife.
Which, sorry to interrupt, was not by mistake. I have to put that out there. And my wife knows this. And the first time I told it on air, I was a little bit fearful that she might get angry at me. But I'm going to interrupt and then I will let you continue with your story. So I was very much a big fan of Jim Rogers, who I've now had the privilege of interviewing a half a dozen times. He's spoken on stage at my conference. He's been on my podcast and things like that. But I first read his books well over 20 years ago, where he traveled around the world and he was explaining 20 some odd years ago that Mandarin was going to be the rising hegemon and we needed our children to learn Mandarin, which, by the way, he moved his family to Singapore and his children win competitions in Mandarin level. little white children winning Mandarin competitions. But I looked at that, I read that, and I was like, this makes a lot of sense to me. I had traveled extensively through the region, and I purposefully went out there and married a Chinese woman because I wanted to have that experience for my children. Now, I am very forward thinking individual. And yes, I love my wife more than anything in the whole wide world. I married her because I love her. Don't get me wrong, but it didn't happen by accident. I was very purposeful about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I admire you for doing that. I read Jim Rogers' book, the first one, when I was in high school. I remember getting it from the library. I just didn't follow through on any of it. I wish I had. My undergraduate degree was in international business, but I didn't leave the United States until 4 years ago, until I had 3 children already. And so I'm behind the curve, and I admire you for doing that.
Super exciting news. We just released our first in a series of expat guidebooks. These are in-depth country guides on how to move to another country, and the first one released is Expat's Guide on Moving to Mexico. It took us over 2 years to compile all the research and write this book on Mexico, and coming in at 475 pages, you can really see how much work has gone into this. It's a complete guide on everything you need to know if you want to move to Mexico, including where to live, immigration, taxes, lifestyle, buying property, how to get a driver's license, and a million other things you would never think you need the answers to. You can find the book directly on Amazon by searching for Expat's Guide on Moving to Mexico, or go to expatguidebooks.com, which will take you to our online shop where you will find the book. Go to expatguidebooks.com. That's expatguidebooks.com.
So I'll tell you how I calculated this. So the cool thing is none of us should sit around and, oh, if only I had done such and such. We all have a place to start. And I stumbled into this language stuff in a haphazard way, which I'll skip the backstory. But I sat down and I calculated one time, how many languages would it be possible for somebody to learn? And the way that I did it was, number one, I made a list of all of the languages that I was interested in, that I thought had strategic value in the world, or at least in my world. And I chose those languages, and then I used the Foreign Service Institute language difficulty rankings, which is what you alluded to earlier, which is a calculation of how much time it takes to learn a language. So for the uninitiated, there is a branch of the US government called the Foreign Service Institute, and it consists of language schools. And what they do is they have government-run language schools where they teach diplomats, military members, anyone who in the US government needs to learn a language. They teach these languages. And they've been doing this for decades, many decades, and they've taught many languages. And so what they have done is taken an estimate of how many classroom hours of instruction they require in order to help someone achieve what I'm going to label as advanced or lower level advanced fluency or advanced intermediate fluency, somewhere in the range between B2 and C1 on the European Common Framework for Languages. And what it means is this person is totally competent in all situations, able to translate, able to interact, able even to do diplomacy, but not native-like expression, not native accent, not native-like ability. So high degrees of fluency, but not perfect. And they divide languages in tiers, level 1 through level 5, based upon how long it takes. And basically it's how similar or dissimilar it is to these languages are to English. So I'll go through, and I made the list, and I made the list in the order of my interest in these languages. So they're not in level 1 to level 5. But first of all, we of course have English, which is the first language. And thankfully my children are native speakers. Then Spanish is a level 1 language, and the estimate is about 575 to 600 hours. So I used a 600-hour estimate for Spanish. French, and by the way, I used all the basic numbers. Well, I'll come to that in a moment. Then French is the third language. French is a 600-hour level 1 language. German is a 900-hour, basically level 2 language.
Level 2, yep.
Chinese is next, and Chinese is a level 5 language, and the Foreign Service Institute estimates 2,200 hours for a native English speaker to learn Chinese. Then I added Latin. There is no Foreign Service Institute estimate of the difficulty of Latin. I just characterize it as level 1 of 600 hours. Then I added Arabic, which is a level 5, 2,200-hour language. Italian, which is a level 1, 600-hour language. Then I added Ancient Greek. It's they characterize Greek as a level 3 or 4 language. I went ahead and said 2,200 hours. I called it a level 5 language to learn both the ancient and the modern variety. Then I added Japanese, which is 2,200 hours, a level 5 language. Then I added Hebrew for my religious interest in biblical Hebrew, and I characterized that as a level 5 language, even though it's probably not, 2,200 hours. Then I added Portuguese, which is 600 hours, level 1 language. Then I added Russian, which is 1,100 hours. So that's 13 languages total, 12 foreign languages plus English. The total amount of time required to learn all of those languages based upon Foreign Service Institute time requirements would be 16,000 hours. 16,000 hours to learn all those languages. Then I calculated, all right, let's say you spread those 16,000 hours over the course of 10 years. Let's say you start at 8 years old and you've got 10 years from 8 to 18. How many hours would that be? Well, that'd be 1,600 hours per year, or 4.3 hours per day. What if you spread it over 12 years, say from age 6 to age 18 or age 8 to age 20? Well, then it would be 1,333 hours per year, or 3.65 hours per day. So if somebody wanted to be fluent in 12 foreign languages plus native language of English, total of 13 languages, including all those really hard ones, and we included the basic Foreign Service Institute time, then you could do it over 12 years with 3.65, so 3.5 to 4 hours of study per day. And so the next question is, could we discount the time? So for example, my experience with my children learning Spanish and then learning French was that they didn't need 600 hours to learn French to that level of competence. They needed a few hundred hours, because Spanish and French and English are enormously connected. Similar with Chinese and Japanese. If you've learned one, then it's a lot less to learn the second. Same with Arabic and Hebrew. Any related language is just a lower amount of time. So I think this is the highest estimate. So I didn't discount it though, because this is not native fluency or full fluency. But in essence, you could learn that many languages with 3.5 hours per day. Now, here's my point, however, as a homeschooler or as an unschooler, is that a lot of language time? Of course it is. I don't require my children to learn languages for 3.65 hours per day. But what I can do is I can put their activities into the foreign languages, like you do with a Russian Spanish teacher or a Spanish nanny. And so I do this with academic subjects. So I put the academic subjects into foreign languages, not all of them, but many of them. So we read novels in Spanish and French and German. And, my son is finishing The Hobbit in Latin right now. And you just kind of adjust it. And then as a world schooler, as somebody who has the ability to come and go, I can put in times of intensive period. So let's go to China and let's spend a month in China. Or I'm going to go and I'm going to enroll you in school in Greece for a semester. And I'm going to enroll you into the local government school so you can have a chance to practice your Greek in a native context. And now all of a sudden, then there's even more time than just the 3 or 4 hours. So my point is that, and one more comment, is that a lot of people who haven't learned other languages, when you think of learning a language, you almost necessarily think of the way you had a high school Spanish class, which was rote memorization, studying flashcards, boring grammar drills, etc. That's not necessary for learning a language. A lot of language acquisition can come from watching movies in the language, with subtitles, reading in the language with tools, reading short stories. And so this can be really pleasurable. So spending 3 to 4 hours a day on language acquisition on the front end might sound really difficult. That's what we do in our household as just normal entertainment. And so it's not my ambition to necessarily teach those 12 languages. But what I wanted to show mathematically is the potential that we have is so much higher. This is totally doable. And if I look at the thousands of hours that the schools would waste of my children's time, and I just put them onto a schedule of 1,000 to 1,500 hours a year of language learning with these pleasurable activities, with cultural opportunities, with foreign travel, with tutors, with nannies, with piano teachers or grannies or whatever you happen to find, these truly incredible results are very predictable. That if I had the clear motivation to achieve these results, it's mathematically achievable. And then everyone would turn around and label my child a genius because they speak 12 foreign languages. No, it's understanding the tools of learning and building an environment that incentivizes that instead of flipping through TikTok all day.
Absolutely. 100%. You just nailed it, because you're so right there. And as you had said, it's actually so much less than that, because I can tell you, after studying languages and watching it, that those numbers of 575 hours to 600 hours for level one language comes from a basis of English. But if you are speaking Spanish at a very high level and you now have English and Spanish as two high level languages and you go to learn Italian, I can absolutely guarantee you that Italian will come so fast. And then guess what? Portuguese is going to come fast after that. And then French. And then it's like these are stackable. And actually, this goes full circle to our conversation that we were talking about before on that base of knowledge, right? Just like as I had described, okay, I've read easily, I can confidently say over 1,000 business books in my life. That is a base of knowledge. When you have a base in Latin-based languages, they are stackable. Same in Germanic languages, same in Japanese, Korean, and Chinese. A lot of that is based off of Mandarin. Mandarin is a mother language. Okay, Teochew and Cantonese and Hokkien, and all of these are dialects of Mandarin. Well, a lot of Japanese and Korean also get their roots from this as well. You can easily look at the alphabets of these languages and see where this comes from. Still today, you can look at Japanese and they use Chinese characters for one of their three alphabets. So there's absolutely ties there. So if you have a basis in that, it actually becomes easier. Plus, when you add in the study techniques and the learning techniques that you are going to develop while learning a language, now you really know how to do it. It's hard to learn at the very beginning because you think, all right, I got to go do Rosetta Stone, or I got to sit in a classroom for high school Spanish, and it's going to be 1 in 10 words that's going to be in Spanish instead of all 10 words are in Spanish. Like your amount of input is so drastically less in situations like that. Once you figure out how to crack the nut, well, then it's very, very easy to learn a lot of them going forwards. And it's so cool to be able to think in the future on like how this will be done. And as your point of in context, my daughter, okay, she doesn't like Russian, but you know what? She still does her piano lessons a couple days a week in Russian lessons because we went out there and we found a Russian teacher who teaches piano. And so everything is done in Russian. So if she wants to do piano, which she quite likes piano, she has to do it in Russian. That's the way we negotiated it for her. Okay. She does her art, even though her art teacher, she does private art lessons 3 times a week, 2 hours a day. Her art teacher speaks amazing English, really phenomenal English. You know what? She's doing it all in Spanish anyways, because she wants to do art. So art is in Spanish. And as we go forwards, we want to find other activities that she enjoys in different languages that are going to help supplement her broader part of education. She already knows and understands English. She speaks English at a fantastic language. Why does she need to learn every other subject that's out there in that language? And if you even want to take it one step further, let's say, okay, I'm going to completely make up an example, but let's say ballet. Maybe my daughter would fall in love with ballet. Okay, cool. She could get instructions in ballet in English, but who are arguably the best ballet performers, or what countries have this as a massive cornerstone of their society? Okay, it might be Ukraine, it might be Russia, it might be some of the Eastern blocs of these countries. What would it be like as a cultural experience for her to learn that activity in the native language? I think that would be pretty rad, to be honest. I like reading some of the books, not just in English. Okay, there's an English translation, but sometimes I like to read literature in Spanish because that was the original language that it was created in. So it's like you can have such a deeper experience of things by going down the rabbit hole of learning additional languages.
Absolutely. And I'll 100% on what you said. And it's just so impressive. So impressive to me what you guys do with these amazing teachers that you find. It just makes it so straightforward. It lowers the bar and makes it normal for the children to learn. And they won't even appreciate it until a decade from now when they understand how different, when your daughter understands how different her experience is with these languages as compared to her contemporaries who learned them all in a classroom and that approach. What's fascinating to me is back to rich get richer and the poor get poorer. The smart get smarter. One thing I learned from that book, Peak, that I want you to read by Anders Ericsson, is on a physical, biological level, our brains adapt to the activities that we do. there are at least three different examples that are cited specifically with rigorous laboratory analysis of the brain size of individuals in these studies. One was an amazing study on London taxi drivers, because driving a taxi in London is a highly regulated occupation, as well as requiring an enormous amount of knowledge and skill just to get into it. And so they proved every way possible that when somebody becomes a London cab driver, certain physical parts of the brain grow larger due to the intense navigation and spatial awareness skills that the taxi driver has to develop and use over the course of his career. The second one they proved is mathematicians. People who do math literally grow gray matter in the parts of the brain associated with mathematical activities. And the third was in musicians. They've demonstrated that musicians' brains physically grow in order to provide more efficient processing. For example, with violinists, if they're left hand, the brain is different than people who are non-violinists or who don't play with their left hand. And so similarly with languages or anything, is that on a physical biological level, the brain itself will adapt to the learning activity. And I have observed this in my son, my eldest, who's the most linguistically advanced at this point in time. I don't know if I've never measured his brain, but what I have observed is that he is a much better language learner than I am because of now studying his seventh language. And all of this happened in the last 4 years, but he sees connections between words. And affirming what you say about how it's much easier to learn a related Romance language when you've learned one, he sees connections that I would never dream of because he has so many languages now to draw on. He's like, oh, you know what? That root word of that is kind of like this other thing in this other language, so it probably means such and such. And I go and look it up, and it does. And he sees the connections in all the root words because language is a sensible science. We understand how languages develop, how they're formed, and they make sense when you understand them. So when we facilitate this ability, your daughter will find always learning languages to be easier because quite literally the language part of her brain could be measured in a lab to be bigger and for her to be genuinely smarter with more gray matter that is associated with that learning ability.
So I have a question for you, and I think we had talked about it a little bit before, but I want to bring it out in this conversation. Do you think that with traditional education, there is any subject matter which doesn't need to be taught, or it's not that it doesn't need to be taught, it doesn't shape that foundational aspect of being a good human being? Do you think that there are subjects or fields or things that are taught or are brought up in traditional education, which, you know what, we don't really need these? Because I had an opinion about this, and then you started to change my mind in private conversations.
I have an ongoing debate on this topic with my brother. My brother was an extremely smart student academically, always easily the top of his class, no difficulty whatsoever. And he succeeded easily in an academic context. And to his great frustration, none of his academic success has paid off in broad life success. And so he's now philosophically with his children, he homeschools them, but he's philosophically very much in favor of an unschooling philosophy, not requiring all these subjects. He looks at it and says, why do you need to study algebra? My knowledge of algebra has never paid off for me. I don't need these kinds of things. And so we have this ongoing debate, and I'm trying to understand and think about it because I also found academics fairly simple and easy for me. I never struggled with it. And I've asked myself, what would I chuck? What would I get rid of? And here's my current thinking on it. And I'd love to visit this in 2 years and we'll see how it changes. But here's my current thinking. Generally speaking, the actual time involved to have a basic exposure to all of the standard subjects of the American high school curriculum, which is the easiest to see, similar in Canada, similar in many places in the world. I don't think the actual amount of time involved is actually difficult. And I'll demonstrate that with a little bit of math that I did. And what I'm saying is I think that we can do both. So if my brother were arguing against studying the academic subjects, he would say that it's much more important that a student discover an area of interest and passion and develop his skills in that area, and that we not waste time studying biology and chemistry and stuff that he's never going to use when he could be dedicating that time to developing his great areas of interest. And I say, yes, I definitely want a student to have the time to develop those areas of interest. If we exclusively create an academic education and we do biology and chemistry and physics and algebra and all the stuff, and we don't have that practical component of skills and interests and business skills and things like that, I think we haven't created a well-educated human being. I think we can do both. And this is my bet, is that we can do both with a little bit of time. So back to the time efficiency. My bitterness towards my standard industrial schooling is the opportunity cost. When I think back to the time that I sat in class every day, bored out of my mind, and what I could have done with that if someone had given me better coaching in terms of my entrepreneurial skills or skills that I was interested in or developing my career, I'm ashamed of what a waste it was. It was an enormous waste. But back to, remember what I said, most homeschoolers in like the elementary and middle school years find that they can do in about 2 hours of class what it generally takes a school 7 hours to do. So my model at the moment, my anticipation, again, my eldest is only 10, so I reserve the right to always change based upon the individual success and needs of an individual child and where we are this year. But my model, my ambition is this. I want my children to have the full academic structure, the full academic complement of classes. I want them to have that. I want them to be skilled and have a basic high school education in biology and chemistry and physics and English and history, American history, and all the stuff. And I want them to have that. And I think that we can probably do that in about 3 or 4 hours a day. That to me seems appropriate, that if a child spends, say, from 8 a.m. to noon every day doing academics with all of that other like attractive stuff that I talked about, good learning science, I think that child can be a superstar in academics and also have plenty of time to pursue interests and program computers and write code and do videos and do entrepreneurship, all the stuff. We've got plenty of time. Remember, children have enormous amounts of time because we as parents provide everything for them, and their only job is to learn. And so I've done some math on this. And for example, if you take an average high school textbook for, say, a biology textbook, and you record it, I think I found some recordings of it, and it was something like 40 hours or so of tape, call it 40 to 50 hours. And if somebody is well-versed in the fields of biology, and it's not just totally new, and you just go through a standard biology textbook one time, and let's say you have an audio recording of it and you read with your eyes while reading with your ears, or maybe you read with your eyes one time and you read with your ears another time, then let's call it 90 hours at a maximum amount. There's a biology class. And that method of education is extremely efficient, much more efficient than even sitting in class. Let me do some more math that I did. I calculated one time how long it took me to get through 1 hour of audiobook listening at standard 1x speed. So not 3x, just 1x. And if memory is correct, it was something like 11,000 words per hour. Then I calculated how much time, let's say you have a 1 hour class in high school. How much time, how many words does a teacher actually deliver in a classroom? I'm a pretty skilled public speaker, but when I'm speaking, even if I know what I'm talking about, like I'm doing right now, I'm speaking extemporaneously, I probably speak at a rate of, say, 8,000 words an hour. And in those 8,000 words, it's not as much as audiobook if I'm reading, but in those 8,000 words, I repeat, I go back, there's inefficiencies. So let's say you have a very skilled high school teacher that can teach at 8,000 words per hour. Then let's assume how much time is a teacher actually teaching verbally in classroom. And let's say you have a 1 hour class. I'm going to guess you might get, say, 40 minutes out of 60 for a very good teacher. The best case scenario, 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah, you're being pretty generous, but okay. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I'm doing my best. I'm trying to steel man this, not straw man it. So 10 minutes at the beginning, 10 minutes at the end, messed up, disciplinary things, stupid questions. Let's say a teacher delivers 6,000 words per hour or 5,500 for easy math. A student with a textbook and an audio textbook, just reading along while listening, which is a powerful learning technique, has twice the efficiency as the class. And that's to say nothing of all of the wasted days that are lost of 180 school day year of hurricane days or snow days and all the rest of the stuff. So the actual amount of content covered in, say, a high school biology class is probably 50 to 100 hours of actual learning. Now, what I've done is I've said, how can we make that even more efficient? So I'll give a practical example using physics with what I'm doing in my homeschool right now. I want my capstone accomplishment, what I intend, subject to all the disclaimers I said earlier, is that my children will take either the AP physics exam, all of them, the A, B, C, D, and E, or C and D, but the AP physics exams or something like a physics A levels in the British system, something like that. And that's going to be their capstone performance that I expect at, say, 16 or 17 years old. This is when you're going to graduate out of Joshua's physics class. So, but we can prepare for that long in advance. We don't have to wait and then just do 1 year of physics. Because what we know is that when we wait and do 1 year of physics, it's too much content all at a time. It's very inefficient and it's hard to learn all that. So we want to do interleaving all the way through. And so what I have done is I have tried to interleave physics all the way through. So here are three specific examples. Number one is I found a math curriculum called Life of Fred that I love. And what's so amazing about Life of Fred is he teaches math always with stories. He created this ridiculous character that always needs a math concept and these absurd harebrained stories and adventures that the children love. They read these math books for fun, and then we learn math along it. But he has in his pre-algebra curriculum, he has pre-algebra with physics. And so he's teaching pre-algebra with physics concepts. So that's step one. The second step of physics is that I found these really great cartoon introduction guides to things that this guy writes. So I have a book called Cartoon Introduction Guide to Physics. And what the author of that does is he takes all the basic concepts of a subject, of chemistry, of physics, of economics, and he writes cartoons of them, a cartoon story. And these stories are pretty simple, but they teach the big concepts. And they teach them in an engaging way. It takes 20 minutes to read a chapter. It works. The third resource that I found is the physics teacher that I love most in the world is a man named Walter Lewin, something like that, a Harvard physics professor. He has these incredible physics lectures on YouTube. And he wrote this book called For the Love of Physics, which is a fascinating, passionate engagement with physics. And so what I do is I take all these resources and I put them into my 10-year-old's curriculum. And they're all perfectly age appropriate, but we spread them out. So we spread them out over a long time. And we do one chapter from the Cartoon Introduction Guide to Physics per week. And so that's 20 minutes per week on physics. And then we have the pre-algebra book, and we do a different day. We do 15 minutes or 20 minutes of the For the Love of Physics books. So by the time we arrive at that capstone high school physics textbook that's going to be super technical, then my student is already going to have a deep connection with the concepts of physics proven out many times, which means all we need to do is go through the textbook one time, do some practice problems, some revisions, some tests, and then sit for the exam. And so the actual time efficiency of this on the whole should be pretty efficient. And so, ask me in 10 years and I'll give you the report, but I don't believe we have to choose. I think that academic competence, barring some kind of innate biological learning disability, academic competence is largely a product of environment, which is why those first years are so important, because the skill of reading is something that has to be built up with hours and hours and hours of reading. Most of that can be pleasure reading, but what I observed in high school was the students who couldn't read their textbook were the same students that never read. And so if you just read and read and read and read as a young child, then reading becomes you have such automaticity with reading that you can read a textbook with no problem. Then also this kind of what I described as the surface area of the subject, if you've been exposed to the subject over time and in physics, we can't do physics with world travel, but we can do physics with traveling the universe with concepts. And we make it engaging with our best living books and the highest highest quality things, that by the time we arrive at a high school physics class, we can go ahead and devote 40 hours to this over the course of, say, a year. And do the math, right? 40 hours over the course of a year is less than an hour a week. If we do school 40, well, let's just say we do school 40 hours a week, 40 weeks a year, because I presume I don't carve it so much into the strange school terms. So let's say we do school 40 weeks a year. That's an hour a week. We split that into 3 sessions, and 3 days a week we do 20 minutes of physics. We can pass the physics exam pretty easily. What we're going against in the school system is astonishingly low performance. And so I think that with all of these kind of foundational skills built up, I see no reason why a normal student can't be highly competent with academics, have the full course of standard subjects, while also having abundant amounts of time and abundant resources that are poured into particular areas of interest, particular entrepreneurship, or whatever it happens to be, to fit him for his career, his financial success, and anything else that he desires to pursue.
I love it. I am absolutely rethinking a lot of educational ideas for my children based on today's amazing conversation, but also in previous amazing conversations that we've had privately, because I had, until today, always thought of it like I had to make a choice. But actually, when you break down the math, like you so articulately just did, it's not an or, it's an and. I mean, you absolutely can do interest-based learning, that my daughter can pursue art and gymnastics and karate for hours and hours and hours all day to her heart's content, and still take science and still take geometry or other things that on first glance for me were not of so much need. But I am absolutely revising a lot of my things that I up until now felt very strongly about. So first of all, amazing. And second of all, thank you.
My pleasure. And I want to be quick to affirm that that's what I am doing. And I want us to build. I really want guys like you and me to build, in many ways, a working group, a mastermind of testing these things. Because what we need is we need to develop new approaches that are informed by the best results of the past, but that also take these things and modernize them. And I'll just share one story. My podcast is called Radical Personal Finance. I chose it because it was good branding. But what I've realized, I just released my 1000th episode, and one of the things I talked about in that episode was that I'm not as radical as I once was 10 years ago. And what I've learned with a little bit of maturity is best exemplified by the story that G.K. Chesterton told about the fence in the middle of the road. And paraphrasing it, something like this: you come across a fence in the middle of the road. You're like, there's a fence in the middle of the road. We got to tear down this fence. And, one guy just gets out an axe and starts hacking at it. But what Chesterton said is the proper thing to do is to first, he says, until you can explain to me why there's a fence in the middle of the road, we're not touching it. When you can come back and you can explain why the fence is there, then we'll make our decision about tearing it down. And this encapsulates what's changed about me. Is years ago, all I saw was my criticism of certain aspects of life, especially in the world of personal finance. And I didn't understand why those things existed in the first place. Now, things should be changed. Just because something has always been done this way doesn't mean it should always be done this way. But before we change something, we should understand, why has it been done this way? Because before you or I came, other men walked this way and they thought, we need to build a fence here. Our children need to study geometry and some aspect of it. And they had a reason for it. Now, they could have been flat wrong, but before we just assume they were wrong, we need to understand what was the condition that they saw at that time that caused them to want to introduce this. And that would be, even just my modern defense of this. I'm just finishing this book, Range, by David Epstein. And the tagline of the book, or the subtitle, is something like The Power of Being a Generalist in a Specialized World. And that I think there's something really important to this generalized educational model that can inform us. And I don't want to create just factory workers. I do want to understand elements. And I'll give one other example for you. As a homeschooler, I discovered that my children were incompetent at sitting in class. There's always a joke that who are the homeschoolers? Well, they don't know how to line up. And I discovered that, you know what? My children actually need to learn how to sit in a class and how to be respectful. We're part of a homeschool co-op, and my 3 boys got suspended from the homeschool co-op because they couldn't sit in the class and be quiet. And I'm all in favor of boys being active and engaging, but there's also this element of socialization where you need to understand how to sit in a class because this is the kind of environment. And so I'm not going to make the decision of going and putting my children into just the local government school for that reason. But I did have to go and say, I need resources. And so I use a Sunday school class and I give careful instruction. Listen, when we're in a class with other people, these are the rules that we need to follow. And I try to do it all in the most advantageous way. But things like socialization, I'm not just going to wipe my hand and say it doesn't matter. But I want to understand why it matters and then bring it in. But I want to bring it in without losing that 15,000 hours. So to me, that's where we're at, is that guys like you and I, we need to be talking about these things, testing them, testing our results, studying the academic literature, learning from those who've gone before us. And we need to update our models of education for the 21st century, but not lose what has found to be reliably predictive of producing well-adjusted, well-educated, and I'm going to say free, because I believe in the value of a liberal education, of a freedom-creating education. We need to not lose the benefits of those methodologies that our forebears developed.
Very well said. Joshua, amazing conversation today. Absolutely brilliant. And I think that you're right. We should, at some point, talk about doing a bit of a mastermind, bringing in other men who understand these things and want to grow it into a environment where we can play with different ideas and test things and experiment. And I think that that would be an amazing project to work on with you. If my listeners want to get a hold of you, if they want to listen to your podcast or follow your work, where can we send them?
I have a podcast called Radical Personal Finance. Over 1,000 episodes are out there. I think for anybody who's interested in these topics, I did something like either a 15-part or 16-part series called How to Invest in Your Children at an Early Age. And this came out of my many years of frustration as a formal financial planner, when people would say, I want to invest in my children. And you say, open a 529 plan on the American system. And I'd be like, there's so many things that are better than a 529 plan. And so finally I recorded this podcast series, and you can find that if you go on the podcast, you can find, it's called, again, How to Invest in Your Children at a Very Young Age. And I go over all kinds of unique and radical ideas that I'm convinced are much better, because every dollar spent on a child when he or she is young is probably worth $5 to $10 of money spent on a child's education when he or she is 18 or 20 or 21. You just get a much higher return when you do it when they're young. And I think this is one of the most important financial concepts we need to understand. Don't save for your child's education. Empty your bank account on the early years, and you will never need to pull a dollar out for college down the road. So that's Radical Personal Finance. RadicalPersonalFinance.com is where you can find me and the podcast and everything associated with it.
Last point, teach your children German. I read a statistic that was showing that if they are bilingual and they speak German, their ability to earn an income is something like 20% higher than a monolingual English only. There you go. Absolutely. Invest in language learning. German is the way to go. The German is the language of finance. There's more money that moves through that part of the world. Over 100 million speakers. I absolutely want my children to learn German. Invest in your children now, opposed to a government plan that's most likely not going to be there anyways. Joshua, thank you so much, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you.
This episode may be over, but your journey to greatness continues by visiting our webpage and signing up for our newsletter. For convenient access to new episodes, show notes, and other crucial resources, visit expatmoneyshow.com. We look forward to you joining us on the next episode of the Expat Money Show. Safe travels.
This year, I'm taking a private group into the Amazon rainforest. Then we head to Fortaleza and explore Brazil's booming northeast coast. Think Amazon River cruises, beachfront developments, and wide open opportunities. From the heart of the rainforest to pristine beaches most people only dream about. This is a bucket list meets Plan B strategy. If you've ever wanted to see the real Brazil and scout investments along the way, this is it. For more information, go to expatmoney.com/Brazil. That's expatmoney.com/Brazil. One more time, expatmoney.com/Brazil. Join us at this year's Expat Money Summit. This is our annual online event, and this year promises to be bigger and better than ever before. Previous year's guests include Congressman Dr. Ron Paul, Doug Casey, Mark Faber, Tom Woods, Peter Schiff, Scott Horton, Alex Craner, Tom Luongo, Jim Rogers, and John Perkins, as well as many of the best lawyers, accountants, bankers, hedge fund managers, and property developers from my trusted Rolodex of contacts. Grab your complimentary ticket at expatmoneysummit.com. That's expatmoneysummit.com. expatmoneysummit.com. If you're planning to move overseas or even just set up your offshore plan B, learning the local language isn't optional. It's protection, it's access, and it's power. Story Learning makes it easy to start today from home by immersing you in real stories, not grammar drills. Spanish, Portuguese, French, and more. Learn the language the smart way before you land. Go to StoryLearningCourses.com. That's StoryLearningCourses.com. One more time, StoryLearningCourses.com. Don't wait until you're on the ground and you realize you should have started earlier.